So now we're going to focus on critical thinking. Critical thinking is really what college is pretty much all about. Education is trying to create an informed electorate and an informed citizenry, and critical thinking skills is the biggest, most important piece of that. So most of you will have some training already in critical thinking skills, but college definitely ups the ante, as they say, in terms of helping you develop critical thinking. So we're going to talk just about what critical thinking is and some different ways of analyzing whether you're applying critical thinking skills, so that you can really think about it in this broad way and apply it in your different classes. So we're going to start with a video, and some of you might recognize this. This is actually from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and this is a humorous example of very poor critical thinking. So after you watch the video, I want you to think about how did they demonstrate poor critical thinking skills, somewhat disguised in an analysis of whether or not this woman is a witch. So take a moment to read this definition of critical thinking. As you can see, it is a very broad term, and it encompasses a lot of approaches to thinking. But I really like this quote, and I think it really gets at it, is that education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. And that's what critical thinking is it's smart thinking. So you don't make snap judgments based on gut feelings and a lack of evidence. You really take time to analyze things to determine if they're true and can be applied. And this is used in every field of study, from the sciences to humanities. Critical thinking is going to be crucial because you need to figure out when things are true. I think critical thinking is even more important, arguably, in the day-to-day world. All of us are surrounded by people who want to influence us, from advertising to politicians to just our next door neighbor to salesmen. And critical thinking allows you to really look at whatever arguments are being put forward and decide if they're really true or not. And so this is the one skill, if you develop no other skills, this is the one skill I hope you develop through the college experience, because you'll find that your life is a lot easier and your money leaves you a little less easily if you can really think through whether things are in fact true. So I've touched a little bit on why critical thinking is important, but there's a lot more reasons beyond the ones that I've mentioned. One of the big ones is employers are really looking for critical thinkers, and it's really important, especially in today's very complicated work environment, because you're going to be thrown problems that you may not have encountered before, and you're really going to need to look at them critically, identify what's going on, see what's true and what isn't, and then act upon that. So across the board, employers say that they want a good critical thinker as an employee. I mentioned earlier that it's very important to be a good critical thinker in order to be an informed citizen, and this really goes into voting in a very heavy way. We obviously have people who want to influence our vote, and they put out information that may be skewed because they are trying to get something from you, your vote. And the other piece is you actually are weighing in on laws that can have a direct impact on your life. So knowing how to look at arguments from politicians, to read about laws and understand the potential implications of them, and then actually looking and fact-checking information that's put forward by different interest groups will help you really be able to make the choices that will benefit you in the future. Rather than whoever the interest group is. College academics is all based on critical thinking, so this is why we talk about it, because this is a college success class. But you're going to need to apply critical thinking in a variety of your assignments and discussions and papers and exams. And it's really important that you do think this way versus just reaching out and taking information that may or may not be from a credible source. Another thing that critical thinking helps you with is a little more personal. If your thinking's unrealistic, it can lead to disappointment. So, for instance, if you read an article or hear about a weight loss approach that says you're going to lose weight at a rate of 30 pounds per week, and you don't look into that to see if the science supports it, to see if it's really true, or if anybody else has really experienced this, and you try it, it may lead to disappointment because unfortunately it's probably not accurate. So that's a pretty simple example. But if you have these thoughts where you think something's going to happen and then it doesn't because you didn't actually check the facts, it can actually emotionally impact you. On sort of the flip side of that, there is critical thinking where you're overly pessimistic about things. You think everything's horrible when actually maybe there are good things going on if you looked into it. And so if you're overly pessimistic about things or always think things are going to turn out poorly, it can really deny you experiencing joy in your day-to-day life. When you're not aware of your thinking, you can't correct it. And part of critical thinking is being aware of where your assumptions and beliefs come from, and then being able to look at that and say, well, is that really true? And everybody's guilty of faulty thinking. And a lot of the time, the faulty thinking is directed at us. How many times have you thought to yourself, oh man, I'm not smart enough, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not attractive enough, or something like that? And if you actually took time to fact check your thinking, you would maybe feel a little bit better because truthfully you are worthy or you are smart enough because you have evidence in your background that shows you this. So you want to be able to really kind of check your thinking. And many people end up being victims of their own thinking because they don't know how to really argue with themselves and analyze what their thoughts are. You may end up not recognizing opportunities that are out there. If you think you can't do it, or you think you're not worthy and an opportunity comes up, you may turn it down because you just, think that you wouldn't be able to make it. It may also keep you from having really strong relationships, because if you make assumptions about people without checking where those assumptions come from, you may miss out on connecting with a really amazing person. It can keep you from exerting your energy where it matters, and it can lead you away from your goals. And so all of these have a giant impact on your day-to-day life, even beyond your voting or your academics. So very important to be a good critical thinker. We tend to take our thinking for granted. That's very natural. And what I'm going to challenge you to do is to not do this. So go ahead and read through some of these questions to help you think about, have you thought about your thinking? This sounds a little meta, of course, but you're really going to want to start thinking about how you formulate your thoughts. So go ahead and read through these and really be honest with yourself. And if the answers are generally no, to whether you've analyzed your thoughts before, try and start doing this in the day-to-day and think about where your beliefs and assumptions come from. So we're going to go through some critical thinking standards, and this is going to be really important for you to know for your discussion, because you're going to apply these to real life media. And these are very good things to check when some information is put forward to you or an argument is put forward to you. So the first thing you're going to want to check on is clarity. So is the point actually clear? And questions you might ask are, could you elaborate further on that? Could you express the point in another way? Could you give me an illustration? Because sometimes when people make an argument, it is just not even a clear argument at all. It's not really understandable for you, right? So the question, what can be done about the education system in America? Well, that's not very clear, because what do you mean by what can be done about it? Well, what's the problem? What are you kind of looking for? So asking them to rephrase or get closer in on the point that they're trying to make will help you actually have a constructive and critical argument about the question at hand. So a better question might be, what can educators do to ensure that students learn the skills and abilities which help them function successfully in their job and their daily decision making? Much more clear question. So then accuracy is a big point that you're going to want to check in for a critical argument or critical thinking. So you ask questions like, is that really true? Are those facts correct? How can we check those facts? And sometimes somebody will put a statistic forward or a phrase and pretend that it's an absolute fact, but you need to actually check the accuracy of that. You'll see that a lot in campaigns, political campaigns, that they'll say some broad statement, this candidate has not contributed to Social Security their entire life, or they don't pay their taxes or something. But you want to go ahead and look into that and see if that's really true. So accuracy is a big point, because if you're just going to base your decisions on facts that are not accurate, you're not going to make a clear decision. Precision is also really important. So this is, okay, well, they are telling you something that's clear and accurate, but it doesn't get down to the details. You have to be more specific. So a clear and accurate statement would be maybe Jack is overweight, but we don't know how overweight Jack is, and then our actions are going to be dependent on how overweight Jack is. So we need a more precise statement. Jack is 1 pound overweight or 300 pounds overweight, because we're going to have a very different intervention based on that precise information. Relevance. So this happens a lot where, somebody will say something, especially in an argument situation, where they'll bring something up that might be emotionally triggering, but not actually relevant to the issue. So if something's brought up, you want to ask questions like, well, is this actually connected to the question we're trying to answer? Or how does that actually bear on this issue? So a statement can be clear, accurate, and precise, but not actually deal with the issue at hand. So students may think that the amount of effort they put into a course should be used in raising their grade in a course, but effort doesn't actually show quality of learning, and what we're assessing you on is quality of learning. So giving you a good grade for effort is not actually appropriate, because we're trying to assess quality of learning, not effort. So that's a very good college-related example. So the next standard you want to evaluate an argument against is depth. So the argument may be accurate, but it may not get to all the very deep complexities of an issue. So, for example, if you're dealing with fixing education in the United States, an argument might be, well, we should just evaluate teachers more often. But it's a really complex issue, and it's more than just evaluating teachers. There are issues with our learning approaches. There are issues with, second language learners. There are issues with school facilities. So if your argument is just that you should evaluate teachers more often, unfortunately, that doesn't get to a level of depth that makes it really a good argument. So another example would be the just say no. Many of you probably heard this growing up, just say no to drugs, but this is just really not very deep. It's much more complex, the issue of drugs and youth. Just saying no is not really going to help much. And there are studies to show that it didn't really. Breadth. So depth is sort of what are the complexities, but breadth is, well, what other points of view are there out there? Is there another way to look at the question? What would somebody in a different standpoint think? Because all of us are living in our own particular worldview. If you make a decision or you take an action or you're making an argument, and it's really, potentially can impact other people with a very different worldview. So you want to try and get a more broad view, and by soliciting information from other people or opinions from other people, or just trying to think about it from somebody else's point of view. Logic. Does it actually make sense? So if you are making an argument, it can potentially be an illogical argument. So do the combination of thoughts and facts that you're saying actually support each other? Do they make sense in combination? Is it contradictory at all? So you want to think about, okay, well, there might be multiple arguments being made. Do they actually work together? And finally, fairness. This is a bias issue. This one's sometimes really hard to identify. Do we have a vested interest in this issue? So if I'm going to go back to the education example. If you're trying to fix education and you're arguing that it should all be charter schools, and you own a charter school, or you have stock in a company that oversees charter schools, and that's your argument, well, that might not be fair, because you actually have a vested interest in charter schools being more broadly implemented in the United States. Are you really looking at the viewpoints of others, and you want to think about the rights of others and be fair if you can? So this is probably the hardest one for us to do to ourselves, maybe easier to apply to other people, especially if they aren't actually agreeing with our worldview. So these are some questions you can ask to determine some of these critical thinking standards, and it really focuses on this one on is it relevant? So ask these questions of yourself and of others when you are looking into an issue. So I'm going to just let you read those on your own. So these are some questions you can ask yourself that relate to the critical thinking standard of fairness. And as I mentioned, fairness is one of the hardest ones to analyze in ourselves. So really try and employ some of these questions when you're making an argument, or you hear somebody else making an argument and you have an inkling that it might not be fair. So for discussion number 3, you're going to be applying these critical thinking standards that we just learned about to real political ads. I've used older political ads, so they aren't kind of raw in people's memory, but you still may have political leanings of your own. I really want you to leave those on the doorstep and use the standards to analyze the statements that are being made in the ads. That said, you should always use critical thinking standards when you're making a decision about who to vote for or what laws to support. And this is a way of sort of practicing that, to look at these messages that are being put forward that are specifically designed to influence you, and think about whether they really are putting forward true statements or not. So this is a how-to guide for dysfunctional thinking. So this is a little tongue-in-cheek, but you want to kind of look at these and see if you actually check any of these boxes, because this is something that really shows you maybe some bad habits you may have that keep your thinking the way it is, or allow you to never actually analyze your beliefs or your thoughts. And so basically try and avoid most of these things, but this can be a helpful self-analysis for you, and it's a little humorous as well. So critical thinking is not easy, and there are a lot of barriers that will make it even more difficult for us to employ critical thinking skills. And so this is a list of those here. A couple that I want to point out are peer pressure. And I think that this one's really common because we are social beings. So it's very hard to go against what our group believes. And often our group may be putting forward beliefs or arguments that are not necessarily based on fact, and they may have not employed critical thinking skills. So it's good if you can go on your own and see if you can analyze some of the arguments that are being put forward. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to argue with your friends, but it's not a bad idea to bring up, well, hey, I read this in terms of the statistics from the National Institute of Health, and it seems like that doesn't actually align with what you're saying. And so you can really help other people start to be better critical thinkers. But you don't have to do that. Just do it for yourself if you can. And then another one that I want to point out is bias. And bias is something where we are self-interested in a certain sense, and we want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And so our bias definitely comes in. So you want to try and be very aware of what your biases are, as well as any prejudices you may have. I want to mention one that people might not know what it means is scapegoating. And so scapegoating is choosing somebody or a group of people to blame for challenges that you are experiencing. And it's really important to use our critical thinking skills to look at whether it's true if this group has the responsibility for whatever challenges we're experiencing, either as a person or as a group or as a community or as a nation. Face saving, another one that you may not know really what that means. That means we want to look good to others. We don't want to look dumb to others. So sometimes using critical thinking skills is maybe contradictory to what we've been saying earlier, and so it makes us look bad if we contradict our earlier argument, or there's a lot of other situations where we may want to save face, and so that's another really difficult one, almost as hard as peer pressure. So just being aware of situations where you're feeling like, oh, I don't want to look dumb, this can really be a barrier to critical thinking, as well as many other barriers that you see here. So that's it for our memory and critical thinking lecture. Please use these techniques to in your own life and as a student and beyond, because they're very important for you being successful in your life and in your education.